I'll okay, right. So by discussing about how the muscle is generating the force, you are going to question. Javastan, can you just allow our come?
Yes, sir, I'm on it.
Okay, right. Fine. Okay. So we are going to primarily try and understand um, uh, the manner in which the skeletal muscle is going to produce a movement. Okay, right. We basically are going to question our basic understanding about um, uh, whether a muscle will produce a force as we think it produces. Okay. In the last class, we discussed that whenever we think about a muscle, right, we always think that a muscle produces a contraction which is helpful in moving the joint, right? That's what is our basic understanding. And this movement is produced by action of the muscle, and if it wants to increase the amount of force which is being generated, then it has two ways of increasing it, right? So one is you can increase the number of neurons which are going to help to pull the muscle, right? The second one is you can increase the number of times a neuron is acting in order to pull the muscle, right? That's how we have been that's what is our current understanding of the muscle force. Okay, right? But if the muscle is going to produce a force like this, there are few problems, one or two problems with that, which we are going to try and understand. Okay, right? So we all know that for any movement to happen, there is a requirement for a force, right? So whenever muscle is going to pull a joint and move a body part, it requires basically a force, right? So the work of the muscle is to generate this force, all right? So that's going to do that, right? Now, the question is, how does the muscle produce movement, right? So in order to answer this, we need to understand one thing. One is, how does the muscle generate force? Number two, how does this force control the movement, right? So because ultimately we are interested in the movement part of it, so that's what we are going to question. Okay, right? So people were trying to learn about it. Yeah, people, one second. So people were trying to understand how does a muscle generate a force and how does this force control the movement. And one was a group of physiologists. Okay, right? What they did was they studied the structure of the muscle and they derived the forces generated. So this model is very familiar to us. What is muscle? We know that muscle is made up of myofibrils, which is actin and myosin, and they pull against each other, and thereby reducing the length of the muscle, and thereby pulling whatever structure is attached to it, that is the bone, is attached, and thereby the movement comes. Right? That's one way of understanding about it. The other way is was done by certain other people who were basically physicists. What they did was they tried exerting different kinds of forces on the muscle, right? And they were seeing the reaction of the muscle to those forces. For example, they applied a load onto the hand and they asked the person to lift it. And when they were lifting it, they exerted perturbations. Perturbations are basically trying to prevent in whichever direction it is moving, right? And they were seeing the forces. They also kept the muscle at different lengths and they added the weight, and they were looking into how the EMG activity was happening and how much force was actually produced out of the hand. For us, it might look very complex for us to think that how to measure the force. But if you have any device which can tell you the force, for example, a weighing machine is there. If you put your hand on it, it's going to tell you how much weight it is. Similarly, you have other devices where if you connect it to your hand and if you're going to pull it, it's going to show you how much amount of force is being how much amount of force is being exerted by the pull, right? So there are always ways of looking into it. And so there were two groups of people, right, who looked into it. The first group of people, when they looked into how the muscle is producing a force, they found that the actin and myosin filaments were overlapping with each other. And so what happened was when there was very minimal overlap, that is when the muscle was at its outer length, right? That is your, say for example, in your biceps, when you're completely extending the elbow, right? The muscle is completely pulled out. That's the outer length, okay, right? So at that time when you are generating, there is less overlap between actin and myosin, okay, right? And then when you had actually bring it to the mid position or so, there is maximum overlap of the actin and myosin, okay, right? So, and then when you still get it to the inner length, that is when you completely flex your elbow joint, the muscle is at its shortest length, and already the maximum overlap of actin and myosin has happened, and then further on it goes inside, okay, right? So there is no further force which can be produced, but only thing is some of the actin myosin bridges are not there because there is too much overlap and it has crossed that area, right? So when we look into this, we see that, right, okay, we see that the muscle force which will be generated if you're plotting it on a x and y axis, right? What do you think will be the shape of the curve? For example, you take the x-axis to be the length of the muscle, okay, and the y-axis to be the force, okay. So now we saw that actin myosin filament less overlaps in the initial and the end range, but in the middle range it maximally overlaps, right? And so how do you think the curve will be? Can you just describe the shape of the curve? Anyone?
Bell shape, sir.
Bell shaped. Okay. Yeah. Anyone
Yes,
else?
sir. For me also, it seems like bell shape because when the length is less or like more, the force generated will be less, and that's my understanding is like the muscle can generate more force in the middle range.
In the middle range. Okay.
Yes, sir. So
Right.
it should come as a bell shape. Should be.
Okay. Right. Right. So what they're telling is, say, for example, if x-axis is the length, right, and so y-axis is the force, all right, length curve, all right. So we draw a force length curve. So the initial, you're going to have a curve which is less force, and as it goes to the middle range, more force, and we come to the final range, the force again reduces. So here there is, say, for example, very minimal overlap. Here there is between actin and myosin filaments. Here there is maximal overlap. And here you're going to have that this has come completely close. Okay, right, clear. So there is going to be again less overlap. Okay, right. So the curve is going to be there. Any disagreements there?
Sir, we are talking about the force being generated or the force being required?
No, force being generated when you
Yes.
are for the force that's being generated. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So when you're going to lift object, right? the muscle, the amount of force you can generate, you'll be capable of generating, will be better in the middle range, right? Yeah.
Agreed, sir.
Yeah. So, okay, fine. So if I hope others would also agree with this. Okay, right. So we just yeah, right. So the shape of the curve needs to be a bell-shaped curve. Okay, right. So now let's go a little bit more complex and then come finally to the problem part of it. Right. So we are basically going to see. But what happened was when people were just a minute, it's just refreshing. So when people were measuring the length and the tension, okay, right? What they found to their surprise was they found a curve which is like this. Right? So do you see the curve? The length and the tension. Tension is basically the force which it is capable of generating. Okay, right? So the curve was not like this, but the curve was like this. Okay, right? The one which you see here, it was like this. Okay, right? So now what happens is our model of the sliding filament, that is actin overlapping on the myosin, now becomes very inadequate. It is not capable of explaining the curve, right? So why is this happening? What is the reason for these additional um, region, this particular region? What is the region? Why is it like this? Needs to be understood. So, so let's move on and try to see whether there is anything else. All right. So there is other model which is called as A.V. Hill model. Okay, right. Which is a 3-component model. We'll come to the 3 components. Okay, right. So the first one is called as a Huxley model. What we know and we are familiar with is the Huxley model or the sliding filament theory. But there is another one which is called as A.V. Hill model, which is a 3-component model. Okay, right? And sliding filament theory you're familiar with, and we just explained this curve by this. So let's move on to the A.V. Hill 3-component model. Okay, right? So according to this model, a muscle consists of 3 components. One is called as a contractile component. Okay, right? The second one is called as the elastic component, and the third one is called as a viscous component. Okay, right? So the first one which you see in the picture is a contractile component. Okay, right? So this part of it, which is the CE, is a contractile element. Okay, right? Yeah. And then you have an elastic component, and then you have 2 components to the elastic, right? One is your SE, and the other one is your, your PE. SC is your element which is in series, right? And PE is the element which is in parallel, right? So as of now, you can understand parallel means to the contractile element, it is parallel. Okay, right? That's the PE component. Second one is SC component, which is in series, that is in the same line as that of the contractile element. So that's called as SE. Okay, right? These both are elastic components. And then you have another component here, which you see, which is called as a viscous component. We'll come to the these components. Why are these there, and what are these basically? Okay. So the contractile element is basically contributed by your myofibrils, which we all are familiar with, which is your actin and your myosin filaments. Right? Now, the elastic components in parallel are the surrounding connective tissues. Now, if you closely see the muscle fibers will be covered by different layers. So you have the first layer, which is called as your endomysium, all right? And then you have your perimysium, and then you have your epimysium. Mysium basically is your fibers which are surrounding your muscle fibers. They help to keep all the myofibrils together, right? And they keep them in bundles, right? So now, if you look into the properties of this particular surrounding endomysium, epimysium, perimysium, if you see them, they basically have connective tissue, and these connective tissues have fibers called elastic fibers. Okay, right? So for those of you who forgot the basic structure of a connective tissue, we need to understand that a connective tissue is made up of cells and extracellular matrix. And this extracellular matrix basically contains fibers and interfibrillar components. Okay, right? The fibrils are of two types. One is collagen fiber, the other one is elastic fiber. So basically, this fibers which are surrounding, right, your sarcolemma, that is, which is covering the muscle, basically consists of a lot of yellow elastic fibers. Okay, right? So that's what we mean by the PE component, or the parallel elastic component, because the muscle fibers are there and surrounding it, the elastic fibers are running. So they are parallel to each other, right? Number one. Number two, we have the, just excuse me. Yeah, I hope all of you are following me, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. All right. So now we will go to the other component, which is the series elastic component. Okay, right? So we all know that a muscle is attached to a tendon, and this particular tendon consists of strands or fibers, which also have an elastic component. Okay, this is architecture. Okay, it's a very small slide. I'll just send it across, but consists of. Okay, right? So you have collagen, yellow elastic fibers. So we see that the muscle is capable of contracting, but it is surrounded by a rubber band-like feature, and you also have a tendon which is capable of being elongated. Okay, right? So we have two elastic components which run in series and parallel. So as we think, a muscle is not only composed of actin, myosin, but it is also composed of certain other structures. Okay. So now we understand that we might think that the actin and myosin is a major component, but apart from that, you have these ones which are also major components. So what basically now happens is you have a muscle which is capable of contracting. At the same time, it also has certain components which can act like a rubber band. Okay, right. So elastic structure is generally modeled in physics as well as in mathematics using the analogy of a spring. Okay, right. So you know that whenever you are going to pull a rubber band, the rubber band will exert a force back to you. When you pull a spring, the same thing happens. Okay, you pull a spring, the spring will pull it back. So basically their natures are slightly similar. So they use this analogy in order to understand how it might be functioning, right? So since we said at the beginning of the discussion that in order to move a part, we require a force, all right? So this elastic component, how it is generating force, is very important for us to understand, okay, right? So the force is given by the formula. Force is equal to K into X, where X is the deformation and K is the spring constant. Now, what is this? When you tell X as a deformation, you would have seen that, say, for example, you take a rubber band and then you pull the rubber band. Okay, right? So what happens is when you pull it less, the rubber band will pull you back very less. But when you pull the rubber band for a larger length, right, then the amount of force you will feel in the hand will be more, right? So the deformation is directly proportional to the force. The greater you deform it, the greater will be the force that the muscle will exert. Okay, right? So now we understand force is directly proportional to the deformation. That's what gives it. Force is directly proportional to X. Now coming to this K, which is a spring constant. This is unique to each spring. You would have seen springs which are thin. You would have seen springs which are thick, right? So we know that a thin spring is easier to be elongated. A thick spring is harder to be elongated. So if you go to the analogy of TheraBand, you have different color TheraBands. Each can exert different amounts of force. So you have starting it with yellow and then going on to gray and other things. So each spring or each elastic structure can have a specific uh, um, resistant force, okay, which it can generate, right? So that is called as a spring constant, okay, right? So pulling a yellow TheraBand is not the same as pulling a green TheraBand or a gray TheraBand. We all know that. So now we understand that the force is also determined not only by the deformation but also by the kind of material which makes it, okay, right? So ultimately the force is determined by both of these features, okay, right? So when the elastic properties are there, all right, so the force generated by the elastic structures are influenced by few factors. One is the force exerted, that's how much amount of force, the length of the elastic structure, that is your X, and the cross-sectional area of the elastic structure, which is basically your K. Okay, right? So all these together determine the force with which the elastic structure will pull back. So I'll stop at this point in order to go back and just connect it with whatever we are seeing, because you might be feeling it slightly overwhelming. We are seeing about the muscle, and we know that a muscle can generate a force in a typical pattern, which is a bell-shaped or an inverted U-shaped, right? And then we saw that when they actually measured, they did not get such a curve, they got a different kind of curve. So what could be the reason for that? For that, we started looking into that a muscle is having other structures, all right, which also would be contributing to some amount of force whenever they are being moved. Okay, right? So the first one we are seeing about the elastic property. Okay, right? All right. So we said about a series elastic element and parallel elastic element. The series is the tendon. Okay, right? Clear. So now this is how the force which is generated will happen when you have the length um, uh, of a spring is there, and when you're going to pull the spring longer, okay, right, what's going to happen is the force which will be generated by the spring will be more in the opposite direction, okay, right? So that's what is the X component or the deformation component of it. But then when you have two springs which are attached to each other, okay, right, then you will have a relation where the total length will determine the amount of force which is being generated. Clear? All right. So when you attach to the muscle a tendon, you're going to see to that it's going to pull you back with a greater amount of force. Okay. Next is the parallel elastic component. So we know that the parallel elastic component is along with the actin myosin, it's a contractile element. You have a surrounding structures, this perimysium and other structures. So whenever you're going to say pull a muscle, then it's going to pull it back, right? So whenever they are in parallel, right? The force is going to when you connect many springs one with the other parallel, right? So what do you think will happen to the force, the total force with which it prevents your pull? Oh, your guess is whether it will increase or it will decrease.
It should decrease, sir.
Why do you think so? It will decrease.
Because I feel it will get dispersed, or like some amount it will be reduced.
Okay. Now, say for example, you just imagine a thin spring which is attached to two attachments. Okay, right? Yeah. And when you have multiple springs, right? Or say for example, when you are going to have one TheraBand, and then the same TheraBand you have 2 or 3 TheraBands, right? And then you try to pull it. What do you think will be happening to the force? Do you feel that the amount of force will be increasing or decreasing?
Increasing, sir.
Okay, right. So it's going to be again increasing. Okay, right. But each one will be contributing only half to the force. Okay, right. So when there are multiple springs, each spring will be contributing only half to it. Okay, right. But the total force will be more. So what we see here is we have a series elastic element, which is a tendon, and we have a parallel elastic element, which is your endomysium, epimysium, perimysium. Whenever they come in, they increase the amount of force. So they are going to contribute to some amount of force. Okay. Right. So now let's move on from this particular part to the next part, which is what do we think will happen when we are going to pull it out? Okay, right. So when you are going to pull it out, what normally happens is we all are very much familiar with the diagram. Okay, right? That is the stress strain curve. Okay, all right. Or the curve of elasticity, right? 1 second. So what happened? 1 second, I'll just go on back to the. Right. So now let's come back and add these elements, and we will just try to connect it. Okay, right? So say a rubber band is there, right? We all know that when we deform it, right, a little bit, it will return back to its original position, right? And then as we increase it, it will again return back to its original position, right? After a certain amount of it, it will not come back to its original position. It will go to a new resting length. Okay, right? That is a second zone. Okay, right? But basically, what we will be seeing is up until the breaking point or the yield point comes, right? The greater the amount of force you exert on a spring, the greater will be its deformation. Okay, right? The greater the deformation, greater will be the force with which it will be pulling us back, right? So the curve of elasticity goes like this. So the curve of elasticity goes something like this. Okay, all right, clear? So the greater and greater the length, the greater and greater will be the recoil force. The lesser and lesser the length, lesser will be the recoil force. Okay. So now we'll get back here. So this would be the stress and strain curve. Okay. All right. So now we can very clearly understand and we'll be able to explain this curve. Okay, right? First, we saw about this particular part, right? Why it is there. Now we have seen that the curve of elasticity, that is the second curve, which is like this. Okay, right? So now when we combine these two curves, right, the maximum force it will be generating, the initial part is this. In this part, we know that there is greater and greater of actin-myosin overlap, so the force is increasing. Also, we know that in the muscle is at shorter length, the amount of elasticity which it will be giving will be less, right? And as we increase and increase, what happens is we go to this region, the middle region, right? Where there will be maximum overlap. And then the end region where it has to, where the overlap will be again reducing. So it will be reducing. But at this point, since the parallel elastic element and the series elastic elements are there, they are going to, whenever you are going to pull it, it's going to give you greater and greater resistance. Okay, right? So at a larger length, what happens is they are basically, these structures, the elastic elements are all stretched more. And so this curve comes in and adds to this curve. And so finally we get a curve like this. Okay, all right. So, so this is the muscle force generation curve or the length tension curve. As we increase the length of it, what happens to the tension or the force which the muscle is capable of generating. Okay, right. So now we'll come to the most important point, which is a problem point. Okay, right. Now, what is this problem point is, now our assumption till now about the muscle, right, is based on this assumption. Okay, right. What do you mean by this assumption is, say for example, if you have to move, say for example, you are moving your elbow and you're going to lift a particular object. Okay, let's say of example 1 kilogram, right? Now the amount of muscle fibers which needs to be active in order to pull it will be a certain number, correct, of all the muscle fibers. Now in order to lift the same 1 kilogram, right, the amount of nerve fibers which needs to be activated in order to activate that many number of muscle fibers. Let's take, for example, 10 muscle fibers are needed in order to lift 1 kilogram. Okay, right? And we might require, say, one neuron, which is supplying all these 10 fibers together, will be required in order to pull it. Okay, right? Now, say for example, if I have a weight which is 2 kilograms, okay, right? And my weight is double. So how many number of muscle fibers do you think would be required?
20.
Yeah,
20.
20. Now, how many neurons do you think will be required? Let's keep the equation the same. That is, one neuron supplies 10 muscle fibers.
2.
2, right? So now if we assume like that, what we are basically trying to tell is, right, the muscle force has a linear relation. That is, for 1 kilogram, how much you are lifting, right? And for 2 kilograms, how much force you have to generate is doubled. So for 4 kilograms, it is going to become 4 times, right? And we are assuming that if that many muscle fibers are active, right, then we can lift it. But think about this condition. When you are starting to lift, the muscle is at one length. When you are coming to the middle, the muscle is at another length. And when you are coming more down, the muscle is at another length. So now we have actually 3 different lengths. Okay. In fact, it is not 3. With each degree of movement, the muscle length is going to change. And whenever the muscle length is going to change, its ability to produce a force will also be changing. Right? Clear? So what now happens is, if you are going to have the same number of neurons activating, right, the muscle fibers, it is not going to be sufficient, because each and every moment when you are going to move, right, the muscles ability to generate the force, and because of its length, the elastic properties, at each moment the elastic property will be giving you different levels of resistance. We saw that F is directly proportional to the deformation, correct? So if F is directly proportional to the deformation, if you are changing the length of it, then automatically the force which it is generating will also be changing, right? So now you think about it, a muscle is there, it consists of a contractile element as well as elastic element, right? So you have a rubber band which is attached, right? And now think about it, if you are going to, let's assume that you are going to pull a object, okay, right? And now you assume that on your hand you have a rubber band or a TheraBand, and the object is attached to that TheraBand. These are two different scenarios, okay, right? One is you are going to pull the TheraBand. The other one, you are going to pull the object directly. The other one is you are going to attach the object to a TheraBand and you are going to pull the TheraBand, right? When do you think it will be smooth?
Directly to the object.
When you're directly pulling the object, it is going to be smooth. When you're going to add it to a TheraBand, what will happen is, as you keep pulling the TheraBand's length increases, and in each length it will be giving a different force, right? So now this is the major problem which we have with the muscle force generation. But when we see our movements are all very smooth. They are not erratic, like how you attach it to a TheraBand and then you're pulling. It's not like that. But in reality, when we closely evaluate the properties, it is giving very clearly that the force generation is definitely not linear. Right? And if it is linear, it is easy to predict. If it is non-linear, you cannot very easily predict at what length what will come. Okay, right? So we do have a whole lot of difficulty in trying to control the muscle, because you have one component which is contractile element, which will listen to whatever the brain tells, and that is supplied by the neurons. But you also have other component which is elastic component, which are not actually supplied by any neurons, right? So when they are not supplied by any neurons, all right, how are you to control it? You're definitely not going to be able to control it. So when you're not going to be able to control it, right, then how is it possible that we can tell that the brain directly controls the movement very easily? Say, for example, I want 2 kilograms of force to be moved. I will activate 20 fibers, right? It can activate 20 fibers, but the elastic properties will change that. It may either increase it or decrease it depending on in which direction you're pulling, right? So what we have come to understanding now is there is a problem in our understanding of how the brain is controlling the muscles. Okay, right. So I think we will stop here. It has been quite a lengthy 1, 9, 10 to 9, 50, 40 minutes I've spoken. So now the session is open to discussion, and you can ask your questions. If you have any suggestions, you can give it. We will discuss about it for a few minutes. Okay, right. Yep. So any questions about the third element? We can see later. Of course, it doesn't change our. It's not going to drastically change our thing. The last element is called as dashboard. Okay, right. About which we can see at a later point of time. So any yeah.
So you said that initially when the second method, according to which we had seen the movement of the muscle through perturbations, the graph was showing a non-linear.
Yes.
But then we are taking into consideration that we are having smooth movements, like physically our body moves smoothly when we try to. So are those two things we are taking together?
Yeah, for example, if you want to drink a tumbler which is filled with water, you can lift it and you can come to you can come, right? And when you're moving from one place to the other place, you don't see any jerky kind of movement, right?
So, but the graph shows a non-linear pattern, right?
That's the force. So that's why I just said there are two components to it. One is how the brain is controlling the muscle, and the second one is how the muscle is producing a movement. Right now, what we are seeing is how the brain is producing the movement. We are seeing a smooth movement, right? That's what is your problem, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we are seeing a smooth movement, right? But actually, the muscle is not capable of producing a smooth movement if it's controlled by the nervous system, like how we think.
Okay, okay, okay.
So that's the problem, which brings us to the point where we cannot anymore assume that the brain controls the movement in the way we think it controls.
So basically, if we think that from the motor cortex, the pyramidal tracts are controlling our movement, we are in a wrong conclusion, because the muscle in itself is not able to produce a smooth movement. Is that
no, that is there is a two components which you're telling. Right? One is you're telling that the pyramidal tract, right? So you're connecting the anatomy to the function of it. Okay, right? So the pyramidal tract is existing, that we know, and whenever movement is happening, the pyramidal tract is active, that also we know, right? But our simplistic understanding of if the pyramidal tract looks at the object or calculates the weight of it and then it moves it is the bigger question. Does it do like that? That's the question.
So to put it simply, can we think like this? If we consider only that nervous system controls the movement, then it has to be expected to be jerky one, or it cannot be as smooth as we are seeing in our day-to-day activities. So there is some control which has been exerted by the nervous system, but in combination there is something happens at the lower level also, at the muscle level also, which the final output we get seems to be very smooth in our day-to-day activities.
Now the question is what is the reason for that smoothness? That becomes our question.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
What happens? Like how this combination of things happens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is the movement being produced then?
Reduced. Yes.
That's
Okay.
what.
Okay.
Yeah. Any suggestions? Any?
Sir, I have one question.
Yeah, Dharmendra.
Sir, if suppose we are passively generate tension in muscle, in a sense of stretching a muscle. So according to that equation, if we are applying force, it means we are promoting the deformation of muscle.
Yeah.
It's like that, sir.
Yes. What they have done is they have asked a person to completely not activate anything. They have put a EMG electrode to see whether there is any electrical activity emanating or not. And then what they have done is when it's not generated, they have pulled it, right? And they saw that there is slight amount of resistance which is there to that. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So that's what happens, right? So that's a known fact which happens.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yep. Any other questions? Any contributions?
Yes, sir. I have a doubt, sir. Now,
Yeah.
So now that we have seen this non-linear model, so
Yeah.
according to that, when the muscle length is more, the muscle will be able to generate more force. Is it like
Yes.
that?
No, the muscle is capable of generating more force. Okay, but that is a combination of both the elastic and the muscular component. Okay, so what we understand by that is, if you're having a muscle which is acting, right, and then when you lengthen it, actually the amount of resistance which it gives to that change is more when you go to greater and greater lengths. But we should not assume that the amount of force which can be generated with a muscle and the amount of force which is generated by the elastic element, both will be equal. Sometimes the elastic element force might be contributing more, sometimes the muscle force can be contributing more.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Any other contributions or any other questions? Okay, just I would like to know the understanding of it. Bhaskar, were you able to understand?
Yes, sir, but there is like sir little confusion.
Okay, which was the point of confusion?
Like sir, actin and myosin, they are providing sir that contraction,
Yeah,
and later on that that elasticity is produced by other component. So
yeah,
in both they are providing a non-linear pattern, and
yeah,
you told that in it's a non-linear pattern, and this non-linear pattern is like combination of both. uh, some part is controlled by brain, and other part is controlled by non-brain component, no sir?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that it's telling that this Zorgi movement is combination of both brain and non-brain control. So like that how it is like sir, you told smoothness is there, like it's already
Yeah.
both brain and non-brain are producing Zorki movement. So how
Yeah, that's the difficulty which is there in explaining with our basic understanding. So whether when we are controlling the movement, whether the brain is controlling the movement completely is what is the question. So this is the first part. So we have two other parts, right? So the spinal level, what is happening, and the central level, what's happening, and after that we will come to a together how this movement is produced. Okay, right. So for now, I just want to leave it like a serial. At the end of the serial, you have something which is surprising, right? So I want to stop it there. That's it. Right.
okay sir, thank you sir.
Yeah. No. Okay. First years Vaishnavi, Vanlal. Okay. Right. So okay, fine. So I hope you would have got some understanding about the basic thing and the problem we have in this. And so that completes the first part of the equilibrium point model. Now, the continuation is going to be after quite a long time. In the next month, the first week, Tuesday, we will be joining again for the spinal component. So the timetable is put up. So in the meantime, if you have any doubts, we can just interact whenever we are interacting for any other sessions. If you have any doubts, you can just say that. The reference is basically you have multiple muscle systems, which is a book written by Winters. And they have given different models, and about the elastic and series, they have given a lot of input. So you can try reading this. The book is called as Multiple Muscle Systems. Okay, right? And you can read for length, tension curves, right, and its characteristics. So that's about it. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for joining. We will meet next month, Tuesday, for the second part of it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'll stop the presentation now.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.